Hello and welcome to Game and Read. My name is Peter.
And I'm Erin.
And we are joined this week by our good friend Julia. Hello, Julia.
Hi, guys.
And welcome to our discussion deep dive on our Yakuza pairing. We are doing Yakuza 0, the prequel to the, we're going to say Yakuza a lot, Yakuza series, as well as the book Yakuza Moon by Shoko Tendo.
This is the episode where we do a deep dive, spoiler alert, talk about everything in the book and in the game. So if you don't know what happens in the book or in the game and you want to experience it for yourself, stop here, come back to us when you have done those things, because we are going to go all out. This is the all-out spoiler episode. Let's start our discussion with the book, Yakuza Moon by Shoko Tendo. So this is a memoir of the gangster's daughter, is what she calls herself. Her father was in the Yakuza, and it's about her life and experience growing up in that climate. What are y'all's first impressions just of this story and of Shoko Tendo's experiences?
Well, I would say you calling it Yakuza Moon is an interesting title. I would say Americans would probably feel a little bit misled by that because there's not much with regards to organized crime in that. Obviously, she never claimed to be a member of the Yakuza herself. However, a lot of it ends up being a memoir about her various relationships, specifically her I'm going to say very bad luck with romantic relationships through her early adulthood up until around her early 30s. And I thought it was a really interesting memoir for that reason, also just not having read a memoir by a Japanese person before. But it's one of those things where it's like it kind of is on the... It was an interesting title on that, and I don't know why I'm getting hung up on that at the beginning because I did like it overall.
Yeah, I almost feel like the book is more about her figuring out her identity and her place in the world apart from the Yakuza and not being associated with her father, who's obviously a big boss at one point, and associated with all of these different men, but rather coming into her own as, at first, a Yankee punk kid and then as a hostess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're starting this discussion with the title, because when Peter and I first started looking for books for this pairing, one of the things that drew us to Yakuza Moon was that the blurb, it really emphasizes the Yakuza connection, right? Like, it's in the title. I think the blurb on the back or the jacket cover is like, the daughter of a Yakuza boss, her experience growing up in that world. When in reality, it's about, her identity and not related to the Yakuza. I found it super interesting that as a kid, she becomes this Yankee punk, which is not at all in the Yakuza. Like, yeah, she gets into a ton of fights. She does a ton of drugs, drinks a lot. We'll get into that. But it's not part of the Yakuza. You don't hear about her, like, any sort of friendships with other Yakuza kids, which I guess I was sort of not expecting necessarily, but was like, I wouldn't have been surprised if she, had a friend whose dad was also in the Yakuza or something like that. It seemed like so much of her life was not in that Yakuza world.
Well,
Right.
she gets singled out, too. She gets bullied because she's the child of a Yakuza family. And because she lives in this nice neighborhood, everyone around her is an upstanding citizen And so she and her delinquent sister are almost pushed into this life of being an outcast because of where they came from.
Yeah, it really almost seems more like a reflection on kind of being tied to the underworld, quote unquote, with regards to being kind of in a lower class structure and being kind of crime adjacent for a lot of different things. Now, Shoko, like the main crime she commits is drug use. Okay, you know.
I mean, she fights a lot.
True,
Which I guess is not crimes.
But a lot of those she did not instigate.
Also fair.
I would say, yeah, no, like if you were actually wrapping up like things some people would consider wrong would probably be use of, speed, because it was just damaging to herself. However, she's always kind of, once her dad is no longer that Yakuza boss because he becomes ill and loses his standing in the organization and ends up resigning, it's a lot about just kind of being like on the margins of Japanese society and being more comfortable with some of the more quote unquote criminal side of things in that world, with regards to being like a Yankee punk who are kind of obsessed with kind of a greaser aesthetic. If you look them up, they often have very interesting bouffants, as it were, these kind of like shaved back big hair and leather jackets, motorcycles, that kind of aesthetic. But also just getting in a lot of fights with those folks over kind of like petty middle school street gang things. And this gave a lot of context to things you would often see, I'm sure you've seen as well, in Julia, in anime, where you're like, man, these middle schoolers really getting a lot of fights. What's going on over there? And if it's anything, like Shoko Tendo's life, that's just what things are like, apparently. You're just always beating each other up. Honestly, more so than my experience in an American school.
Well, bullying in Japanese schools is intense. And you see that a lot in anime too, that it's just a different level than what any of us experience here, or at least any of us that have like a reason to be bullied, I guess. But yeah, foreigners in Japanese schools have a really rough experience too, because of how fierce it seems the climate is.
I do think it's interesting that Shoko is on the margins because of the Yakuza connections, but then as her life goes on, as she grows up, she is on the margins for the poverty, right? Like her family, once everything goes downhill, it really goes downhill. Like they do not have money. They are, trying to get by. And I do think, it's interesting to see that she started when she was a kid. She was in this nice neighborhood. The kids made fun of her and bullied her for basically the way her family got their money. And then on the flip side, she also experienced the prejudice and the discrimination and just the negative impacts of being poor. And not just being poor, but you used to be wealthy. Your dad used to be this, high up figure, and now it's all crashing down. And so it's like, it's wild that she pivoted from, she didn't pivot, I guess. Her life pivoted from a high point, but still being bullied, to like a super low point and still being bullied. And so it's sort of, to some degree, I understood the rebellion that she really talks about, and that the whole sort of impetus for dropping out of school because school was horrible, and, running around with some older kids and trying to find that community, because she didn't have it when her family had money. She didn't have it when her family didn't have money.
Yeah, and her sister is really her only connection.
Yeah, her sister's the only one who even knows what it's like to have, obviously to experience that too.
Yeah, well, and when she first goes to that club that she shouldn't have been in as a 12-year-old, sneaking out of the house with her older sister, who was all of maybe a 15-year-old, and they go into this kind of like disco style club where I guess the Yankee kids like to hang out. And I remember one being concerned that like something bad was going to happen to her in that scene. Nothing does. However, I ended up feeling very happy that she like felt like she had a connection and actual friends. Obviously, that ended up turning down for the worse in the long run. But after you kind of read about her childhood of being like, oh yeah, Dad would come back in drunken rages and stuff, and then all the kids at school are mean to me, and I'd hide under the blankets when he was dragged home by the hostesses. And then so he suddenly has at least some sort of community of kind of, at least aesthetically, these cool looking, 80s punks in Japan. You're like, oh yeah, great. Okay, she found her people. It's just that those people also had a lot of problems and therefore turned to heavy drug use, including a lot of paint thinner, which I don't know if that was if that's just more prevalent in Japan, but I don't remember hearing nearly as much about people huffing. Well, I was growing up as a way of getting high, but I think it depends
We missed the 80s, Peter. We didn't, the 80s were a different time.
Well, yeah, and I think some of it probably had to do with different levels of governmental and societal stigmas on other drugs, because she does mention marijuana a few times, and then she fully becomes addicted to, speed, amphetamines, I'm guessing. So it's just interesting that, her first thing is like, oh, yeah, we're just huffing all the time. And she doesn't give any context because I'm guessing it's just a common enough thing that you don't need to add context in a Japanese book.
Well, and I do think I was not as surprised that that's where it started because, paint thinner, in theory, is more accessible than actual drugs, right? Like, that's one thing is that
anyone can buy it.
The accessibility factor, I think, plays into it. I also definitely heard about huffing when I was growing up, so I don't know.
But not about individual people doing it.
Well, I mean,
just the concept.
Like being warned, or like I knew that people got high from huffing stuff.
Yeah,
I heard about huffing, like Sharpie. I don't know. That's a little different, but I think that it was not. I was more surprised, perhaps shocked, how quickly it turned to speed and how quickly that like ramped up. And I think one of the things that really struck a chord with me in reading this is how young she was when all of this started. It was like shocking that she's 12 and she's going to this club and she's getting hooked into this life. But then, and we'll talk about her relationships with men, but at one point she is like, has talked about all these relationships. Like, yeah, on my 22nd birthday, it was all over. And I was like, holy shit. She's only 22 at this point. Like, that is one thing that it kept jumping out at me, is just how young everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, how young all the women are in this story, in her circles, because it seems like the men are always older and the girls, they're girls. They're, 12, 13, 14. The guys are 17, 18, 19, into their 20s. So that's something that it's almost like the innocence of huffing paint thinner at a young age. And then the fact that she gets addicted to speed before she's a legal adult is just, it's a really intense storyline that with the whole age aspect of it.
Well, she's not hitting any of the typical milestones in terms of going to school and graduating and applying to college or any of that stuff that we take for granted. She just doesn't have any of those options. So it's easy for her to kind of like not go through those motions and stay at what we consider to be an innocent age.
Yeah, no, and really even when she does go into, kind of a mainstream milestone of getting a job, living semi-independently, or at least on her own in an apartment, her primary job through her 30s, whenever she would get a job, was primarily being a bar hostess, and those, it's based around a lot of things. Obviously, the charisma is part of it, but it's also you want pretty girls to sit with these guys at bars and, be charming and get them to keep spending money, and so it's it's like a societally acceptable way of kind of, selling your charm and youth in that way. And that's one of the ways she met a lot of the people who ended up being abusive towards her, and many of the relationships she got in with is just like, even when she did kind of hit those milestones, and I'm sure there are plenty of hostesses who do it perfectly safely and fine and don't get involved with terrible people, she kind of always wound up the target of some very bad actors.
Well, there was an interesting parallel between the video game and the book in that regard.
Yes.
Which, am I allowed to talk about that yet?
Not yet. Not
No,
yet.
next episode.
Okay, next episode.
Make a note and remember it. And then
Okay,
we'll
I'll
do
remember
next
it.
time.
Book only right now.
Okay.
I think this is a good sort of segue to talk about Shoko Tendo's relationships, because that is really I would say the connecting thread throughout her memoir is the different relationships she has with men, and that they are mostly abusive and terrible and unhealthy, both emotionally and physically. Who do we start with? Which one do we talk about first?
Probably Majima. I mean, we should probably, I think chronologically is the only way to truly approach this one. So Majima, she meets as he's kind of like the last business contact her dad has from his Yakuza days. And it's a little unclear what sort of dealing or money lending or whatever they're getting involved in, but he's the only one who kind of comes around the house still and seems to be providing some sort of financial support to the family. And he uses this to actively pressure Shoko into a sexual relationship when she's 17. Mm-hmm. Some age around then. And he does this both in kind of classic abuser predator fashion, in that he, makes her keep it secret from her whole family, takes it away secretly, threatens to reveal it himself, so making her feel ashamed about this relationship. And then that's even before you get into the emotional and literal physical abuse and violence he does to her
He's also the one who gets her addicted to speed. He uses that's another tactic, along with these manipulative, revealing shame. It's the very real drugs that he forcefully injects into her, and then does not take no for an answer from her as far as the drug use.
And I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add on it. It's just really a terrible relationship that the only reason she gets out of it clean at the end is that he just dies, at a relatively young age from lung congestion. He was maybe in his 30s at the top. She didn't really specify his age. He wasn't super old, but he definitely wasn't, as young as her. And he just kind of up and dies, and that's why, he never really comes back like some of the other folks she gets involved in. But it's just, he kind of sets up her first awful adult relationship that will kind of be an indicator for a lot of her future awful adult relationships, of being being forcibly made dependent on him in different ways. She does feel some personal level of validation, where she does talk a lot about how much she did enjoy having sex with him, and that she did have a personal drive for that. However, in the process, he did a lot of bad things. I don't want to get too in-depth because it gets a little gross, and it's all in the book. And I don't want to just spell it all out, but it's one of those things where it's like, had he ratcheted it back about 5 steps, it still would have been a bad relationship based on age and the coercion level, but at least would have been consensual, quote unquote. But it just was a very it was upsetting that was also her first longer relationship before meeting some slightly better ones, and then arguably some worse ones.
Well, she has the opportunity too to connect with guys who are a little healthier. There's the one guy who saves her from getting beat up. There's the one guy who saves her from sexual assault, and she just kind of chooses not to pursue these relationships with these other people who are her age. So that's kind of an interesting thing too, that it seems like she doesn't take the steps that she needs in order to put herself in safer situations.
And once she has had this relationship with Majima and she's become addicted to speed through his coercion and force. She tries a couple times to distance herself, and she can't. She like physically can't because she needs her fix, and she knows that she tries to get off of it. She tries to refuse, and it just makes the violence worse, and it makes the withdrawal horrible. And so I think it's that, you know, she gets trapped in that cycle so early of the drugs, of, you know, she loves the sex when she's high with Majima, and he then uses that to keep her going, even when it's like he's terrible. He does things that, and he says things that it's like, girl, get out. But at the same time, he you know, will apologize, and then he'll shoot her up with drugs, and you'll be like, oh, don't you remember? You love this. You want this. You need this. Like, it's not me. Basically, that kind of approach, and it's just it's I can see how she got entangled in a way that she just couldn't figure out how to get out. Even when there are these men that are, you know, kind of not given to her, but are in front of her, that are clearly better people, clearly healthier relationships, just like not even on a romantic level, but it's like, you know, just because they're there doesn't mean it's easy to just change the way you see and interact with men.
Right. Well, and she kind of lacked a lot of the support. Like she loved her mother, and I think you could argue that she had a loving relationship with her mother. However, her mother was not a powerful figure who could necessarily guide her through, like, oh, how to get rid of a, you know, abusive relationship. And her father was not in a position to do that. And the reason, you know, they kept it secret on both their ends is because they both feared the repercussions that could happen of it being revealed. And so it's just like, yeah, it's hard for her to know where to turn. And so she ends up just kind of moving out when she gets the opportunity from her relationship with another man, Shin, which, while it was loving, was still not a good relationship. And she just is like, okay, I'm on my own now. When it's like, no, you need support, but you're not giving the information your support would need to be able to help you because you feel the need to keep it secret. Where it's like, had she turned to her parents, maybe they could have helped her. But however, her dad had also set up a pretty not great relationship. So it's one of those things where it's like, where can she turn? All of her friends kind of suck. Her sister sucks. She has a younger sister. Obviously, she can't confide in her with all that. Her older brother strikes me as like pleasant, but kind of aloof. You know,
yeah, he gets out as quickly as humanly possible and just doesn't interact. I like forget that he exists, and then he comes back for funerals and weddings, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just like, oh yeah, who could she have turned to? So no wonder she felt kind of like stuck and was like, well, I guess I'll just take the pleasant moments when they happen. Because there wasn't anywhere to turn from that. I mean, should we move on to, I guess, her next relationship?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And with Shin, who's the next man, who she actually is dating while she's also together with Majima. It happens at the same time. Shin is married, but he loves her, and he gets her set up with an apartment, and it's so interesting because she talks so lovingly about Shin, but also is like, yeah, and then he just like wouldn't see me for a long time. But when he did see me, it was wonderful. And it's clear that she knows that this is also not going to end the way that she maybe wants it to. Shin is married. He's not leaving his wife. In fact, it gets to the point where after a while, Shin comes to her and basically is like, yeah, do you know why I've been gone for so long? She's like, no. And he's like, my wife had a baby. Like, she just had it. I can't, like, and
she's the one who had it.
Yeah.
She just up and had a baby.
And Shoko had didn't even know that his wife was pregnant. Well, because I think he's like, oh, my wife is pregnant. She's having the baby right now. And it's like, so, Shoko has this loving relationship, and yet it's with this man who, in some ways, is so opposite of Majima because he wants Shoko to be dependent on him, but he kind of doesn't let himself get too attached to her in a lot of ways. I mean, he says, I love you, or I think he says, I love you, and I, want to be with you, but I'm still married. And it's like he is not possessive in the same way that Majima is possessive.
Right, and he cares for her in a way in that he really wanted her to not be addicted to drugs, although he didn't really offer a lot of support in that. He was just kind of like, you gotta stop it. You shouldn't do this. And she was like, oh, I know. And then wasn't it also from him that she became pregnant and then miscarried without even, telling him?
Yep.
Which I guess isn't directly his fault per se. I mean, outside of not having safe sex. But it's just one of those things where it's just like, yeah, her relationship with her still caused her a lot of grief that you shouldn't be putting on a 19-year-old. Mm-hmm. In general.
His affection was performative affection, right? Like, in that he said, oh, I hate that you use, but I'm not going to do anything to help you not use.
Right, because then I might be gone for a night and then my wife will freak out.
Exactly.
Yeah, it seemed like she ended up being the de facto vacation for a lot of the guys that she was involved with. And she was never the person that they committed to until she meets her husband. And by that time, it's almost like it's too late. She can't see herself as anything other than this kind of guilty pleasure that she has slated for herself as a role in relationships.
And even on a non-sexual, non-romantic level, when she's in the apartment, when she's still with Shin, her sister and her sister's horrible husband, who is the worst.
Like Icho?
Yes. Comes and is basically like, hey, we're in debt. We need a place to stay. And so they come to her and she's like, okay, you can stay in this apartment. And she gets set up in she gets her own place. And then it turns out they just ran off, left huge amounts of debt. The landlord is pissed and they fucked her over. And so it's like, even for people who aren't romantically involved with her, her own sister is just coming to her when they need something, when they want something, when they need to, not deal with their real life for a little bit. I think you're totally right, Julia. She's the one that they go to sort of be the escape, whether it is a financial escape because her sister and her sister's terrible husband come back and take a lot of money from her. We can get into that in a minute, but it's the, coming to her for shelter. It's the men that come to her to escape their lives or to, just have this non-real, I'm doing air quotes. You can't see them if you're listening to this, but I'm doing air quotes under real kind of relationship. No one has a real relationship with her. And the next boyfriend, Kuramochi, also doesn't have a real relationship with her because he starts as a client when she's a hostess. And he's just like, hey, girl, let me buy you a house.
Yeah, he just kind of pops in and out, and never actually makes like a normal commit. Because like the way these guys always seem to want to commit is to be like, oh, let me like provide for you, but not ever actually give you any sort of like emotional support, which is definitely a thing that plenty of people are still on in a lot of ways. But it's really just like she just needed somebody who could like sometimes empathize with her and not abuse her. Instead, the best she ever got was a guy who'd be like, "Let me pay for an apartment for you for a while." It's like, well, I took it because why the hell not? But that's not what made me happy.
Kind of sees the same thing with her mom too. She says that her mom was used to being this upstanding wife and this stand by your man kind of character. And she goes out and works for the very first time when her husband falls ill. So she's seen this behavior modeled before, that it's the woman who gets taken care of. And everyone seems to think that money just comes so easily to her when really she's out hustling, and she's being provided for because she is charismatic and because she can build those connections very rapidly. But doesn't seem to serve her super well.
No, and I think it's really interesting that she is a young adult in the economic boom, but she does not benefit she does tangentially through these men that give her things, but like she does not benefit from the economic boom. And so I think that it's one of those that perception that like, oh, everybody gets money, everybody spends money, it's great, it's wonderful. But her story really underscores that like that was not true. For some people, yeah, made a lot of money, could spend a lot of money, but for a lot of other people, that just was not. They were still scrimping and hustling and just trying to get a base amount of income to survive. And
well, there was no Reaganomics in Japan, Aaron, so no trickle down effect. No, I'm just kidding.
And Shoko ends up, it flips the script later on when she is now the provider once her mom dies. It's she has these men that are providing for her, and then her mother dies, and she's the one that her dad and her sister are coming to for money, and she has to now be the one to figure it out.
Right, and the only reason her sister's coming to her for money is because her husband is a notorious gambler, just awful all the time, doesn't do anything, can't even go get a basic-ass job, even though at least when she first meets him, it is brought up that he was, from a wealthy enough family, went to college, was, like, reasonably intelligent, but just never did anything with that and just was, what we would now call a fuckboy. And so it's just really like, if you go through just all of Shoko's relationships with men in any variety, sexual, non-sexual, they're always kind of leeching something off of her and never really giving anything back to her that she can actually, use, where it starts with like her poor relationship with her father. I guess the only like decent male relationship she ever hints at is like her grandfather, but that ended when she was like 5 when he died. Where she even brings up how she feels, haunted by him being like, "You're not living up to your potential." And every other man except for Taka is more of a taker than a giver ever. And even her relationship with her husband, Taka, is not fulfilling to her in the end in the way that, she feels it should be.
Yeah, and I think, Julie, you mentioned earlier, by the time she gets to Taka, by the time she and Taka meet and get together, I think she's so jaded, or so just like, she's had such a streak of terrible men in her life. And the idea that there's a good man who, wants to help, wants to support her, help support financially, is willing to help her family, is there for her emotionally. she just like, how do you respond to that when this is the first time that's really ever happened? And it totally makes sense. I mean, I was sad when that relationship ended because I was like, oh, this is like a healthy relationship. And, you know, it seems to be that things are good relatively, but, you know, she does talk about that it's just not, she's not at a place where that can be fulfilling and that can be something she's ready for yet. And I think that this whole memoir is really that self-reflection back and that processing of like, yeah, I went through a whole bunch of horrible shit. And like, I have to articulate and acknowledge that to have healthier relationships.
I don't even really remember why they ended. It was just that they grew apart. It wasn't like a climactic thing in the book either, which says something.
No, it wasn't, and it was kind of phrased as Shoko basically realizing after she kind of came through the tunnel on dealing with her, you know, eating disorder and the health scares and everything, that while she had a deep affection and love for Taka, that it wasn't necessarily a romantic one. And I know it feels really weird that, you know, the one person who has been mostly there for her, it seems to be the one that she seems like sexually incompatible with. And she doesn't say that's the only reason, but it's definitely kind of hinted around that, as that's kind of one of the defining things she brings up before she talks about how she chose to end it with him. But I think it was more, I honestly, she also seemed to phrase it kind of like, I'm bad for you. I've, you know, kind of dragged you down through all this stuff. All the craziness with me and my family and everyone I interact with has only made life worse for you. So you should probably go somewhere else, even though all this has already happened and it might be a little too late after, you know, 7 years or so of marriage.
And he doesn't want to leave. That's the other thing that I think it's hard. It was hard for me as a reader because it was clear to me, even if there wasn't that romantic or sexual relationship and compatibility, like Taka still cared for her deeply. And so it was really hard to read that her interpretation and her perspective on, you know, I'm dragging you down and you should move on, and that he just didn't want to. But in the end, he acquiesced because he did care for her deeply. That it was like, you know what, if this is what you want, this is what we'll do.
Yeah, well, and Shoko really seems to frame him as kind of like the only good man she's ever interacted with, because I don't think she ever says anything bad about him, and at any point of it, you know, of the whole book. I mean, she might kind of be a little self-effacing about how he kind of threw away his potentially burgeoning life as a Yakuza for her honor, effectively, when he goes after her ex who attacked and assaulted her, and decides to, you know, quit the Yakuza because he thought it would be dishonorable to be like, yeah, if I can't go beat up an asshole who attacks my girlfriend, you know, why should I do this at all? And he cuts off his pinky to, you know, leave the organization. So she never has anything bad to say about him, which means that he probably honestly didn't do anything bad in Shoko's eyes, at least. She never mentioned times they fought or that he did anything wrong against her, and he financially supported both her and her family at different points. And even, you know, her family thought he was just a very stable and caring guy, it seems.
Yeah, and she, like, fakes the length of their relationship because her dad wants so badly to see them together and happy. She makes him come back around after they've broken up to assuage his fears that she'll be alone.
It was really interesting that the end, her relationship with her dad at the end of his life, and that it just felt so different. And it's, I think part of it is the way that she frames it, because at the beginning, really through her early 20s, her father is a disapproving male figure in her life. He, is basically like, you're a fuck up because you dropped out of school. When she had her brief stint in like juvie reform school, and she was doing well, and then she just was like, whatever, and like didn't end up going back. And so he just sort of saw her as a failure. But by the time you sort of circle around to when he is ailing, her mom has died, and it just feels like Shoko and her dad are able to connect on a level that wasn't possible until Shoko was an adult. It definitely felt like that like Shoko's father sort of realized that he had not been a good dad in a lot of ways, and he was trying to almost make up for it in the last years of his life. I mean, he's Maki, who is her sister, who is a bitch, has always been.
She comes around.
She's
eventually.
a deadbeat. She's not. Yeah.
Eventually, she comes around.
She's just kind of a loser.
I hated her with her damn husband. What? Anyway,
both of them. She had two husbands.
Yeah, both of her husbands were terrible. Anyway, but Shoko's father says like, Maki was a daddy's girl essentially, like, and he says, I knew basically you were tough enough, like we were always butting heads because you were so strong-willed and you did what you wanted to do, and I think that he sort of realizes, I should have had a better relationship when you were younger, and I recognize that I saw things in sort of relative to your sister, and that was not a great way for you to grow up.
Right. Now, what I want to get towards the end here, since we're coming up towards our time barrier. What did you all think of I would say the kind of climax ending, if you had to call one, would be when she's finally able to buy her parents a nice burial plot, and what your thoughts were of that as a ending life goal to end the story on. Obviously, that only happened when she was about 33, 34, so she's lived almost 20 years since then. But what do you guys think of that as kind of the final thing that she writes about with any real depth?
Did you think that was the climax? I thought the climax was her getting her tattoo.
Oh, this is interesting. So
the tattoo may be the climax, but the last significant thing that happens in the book, because the tattoo happens like midway through the book.
Yeah, but she continues to talk about it in terms of like it presents problems for her, like with her mother's funeral.
That's
getting
true.
changed into her kimono. She realizes, like, oh, this is a permanent decision I've made. And Maki gives her shit for it because Maki's Aaron's favorite person. And Aaron hates tattoos.
So maybe I jumped the gun here. Let's talk about her tattoos before we get to the burial plot.
Yeah, so I think that these are both. I will say one critique I will put up of this is that, and it's maybe it's a little bit of a critique, is that I think because Shoko Tendo is not writing in English, and her education was her traditional education and formal education was interrupted, very much so. The writing is a little unclear at times, and so I feel like both the tattoo and the burial plot are both, like, those are the most significant events, and I feel like they both are the climax. So I think that let's talk about the tattoo and the burial plot, because I think they're both those like peak moments, and I almost wanted one of them to be a peaker, like a bigger moment, but I feel like they were both sort of on equal footing as far as like the peak of the event.
But we're going to the tattoo.
Yes.
So I think the thing that struck me with the tattoo is almost how spur of the moment her decision to get the tattoo was. Where she has she referenced tattoos throughout the book. You know, she mentioned her father's back piece. The like traditional Japanese Yakuza back piece is the most common tattoo referenced throughout here. Majima had one. The other, I think every Yakuza she got involved with had one. And then she just happened to be kind of walking into a tattoo parlor because her friend's boyfriend was getting something done. And then she just kind of suddenly was like, I need one of these. Which wasn't what I expected her decision-making process to be, based on how clearly important the tattoo is to her, or the tattoos. So yeah, I was just surprised by how spur of the moment her decision-making process seemed to be, even when, you know, her decision of what tattoo to get seemed to be a bit more thoughtful.
Well, and her friend is like, no way, dude. Basically, like, you're joking. And Shoko's like, no, like, this is what I'm gonna she has this moment of clarity of like, tattoos have been, for me it felt almost like tattoos have terrorized her. And so when she realized, like, this is a beautiful art, holy shit, this is what I need to, like, be me. I think you're right, though, about how, like, quickly it was just like, I'm going to do this. And it seemed like the first thing that she really committed to 100%. And I really love the tattoo. I mean, it's on the cover of our version of the book. And the book we have has pictures inside that sort of detail it out. It's a beautiful tattoo. But the implications of the tattoo on a woman are pretty huge. And so it was so interesting that was the thing that she really felt like she could just commit to and do.
Well, and all the different steps of self-actualization that she takes through the book almost lead to this point, like her becoming a Yankee and her getting into fights, but then making a financially fulfilling effort to become the number one hostess at the club and everything. Like, all of these are things that she's doing that wouldn't be considered ladylike, that wouldn't be considered her place. And yet, and everyone tells her this, and I think it's maybe Shin who says that he loves the tattoo. Or was it Taka? I don't remember. Somebody said they love the tattoo, and it's a confirmation for her that she's not just any woman. She is very much her own woman. She's very much her own person. But Aaron, how did you feel reading about, like, a first timer getting a tattoo that big? Like, did you feel the needles in you?
You know what? I really would. It's
a full body tattoo.
I know.
Back, front, arms, down to her legs. It's an incredibly large piece.
As someone with tattoos, the idea that your first tattoo is this massive, intricate,
full color,
like,
going for 3 hours a day for like 2 weeks.
Oh my God, it did. It made me just, like, my skin crawl a little bit because that's such an intense experience. But I also felt like it was so appropriate for her life and her story. And it was like the pain and the discomfort and again, I keep using the word commitment, but the commitment of this it was like she was pushing through all of the pain and discomfort that she'd lived her life with. And by getting the tattoo, by getting to the other side, a completed full color, beautiful tattoo, it was almost like validation that she was going to be okay. That if she can get through this, she can get through, the experiences she's had. She can be a strong woman. She can be her own person. And it was like this tangible validation of that.
Right, and the symbolism of what she got tattooed. So her back piece is a famous courtesan woman with a dagger in her mouth, which it's an incredible looking just piece of artwork, but also when you dig into the symbolism of it, of just, where she was a woman who was so heavily mistreated by her sexual partners and treated like an object by so many of them, and was frequently the other woman because she was involved with men who already had spouses or partners or whatever. And then also just the idea that she's also just carrying a weapon in her mouth. You definitely feel a bit of symbolism when you think about a woman who's gone through all this and then ends up kind of... No, she doesn't weaponize her words by writing this book. However, she is reflective and, I'm going to say, using pointed verbs to describe her life and her experiences.
And the symbolism, I love the symbolism is the whole reason she got the woman, because when she's talking to the artist, he pulls it out. He kind of picks it out for her, and he's like, I just think it's you. I get the feeling it's you. And he explains that this woman was a courtesan, and she was the number one woman. And Shoko is so like taken because she's like, I always wanted to be the number one woman, and I'm always the number two. And so the idea that there's this essentially powerful woman who is number one, like that is the confidence that Shoko needs to really feel like, you know what, I'm worth being someone's number one.
So now that we've reviewed the tattoo, because that's definitely important to this book and certainly important to the book's marketing since it's the cover with added middle photos, full color, I found to be one of the more touching moments is when she reveals her purpose for wanting to save money after her father dies and why she's working so hard as a hostess to become, the number one girl like she does right as she's ready to leave, is that she is saving up money for a nice burial plot in a good cemetery in, notoriously expensive Japan, where any amount of space can just be very pricey, even if it's just a place to put 2 urns with some ashes and bones in it. And I found that to be one of the more touching moments, and certainly one of the ones that really gave her some closure, and I think that's why it's one of the last things she chose to write about, because it was a chance for both her and her siblings to come together a little bit and to kind of reflect on the life that they've all kind of experienced through their parents, with a little bit more emphasis on the dad part of it. But I just thought it was a nice way to kind of to wrap it all up, and that, to the idea that you're scrimping and saving to make sure your parents have a nice resting place for eternity after they've already been passed away for a little while, I thought to be a very touching thing as somebody who's not honestly very spiritual.
Well, and it was part of her mission initially had been to buy them a house, and while they were still alive. So it's also an acknowledgement that even if you have a long-term goal like this, and even if you're working your hardest to get there, it can still be pulled out from under you, and you have to then achieve whatever is closest or whatever builds the strongest connection for you too. So it almost was, for lack of a better term, kind of a consolation prize for me as a reader that she was able to do that, and that wasn't so time sensitive. And I mean, both her parents' deaths were very sudden, too, in terms of her dad getting sick and then just refusing any treatment. We had at most 6 months to live. And I think he held on a little longer than that. But with her mom, I mean, her death was so heartbreaking because she had just sent her a letter, and her mother had responded to that letter with, "We don't need to worry about Shoko anymore." Ugh, just heartbreaking. And then immediately had a stroke 3 days later, something crazy like that. So I think with the burial plot, it was a way for her to advance into true adulthood by respecting her parents and respecting that goal that she had for herself in regards to her parents, but also just being stable enough to make a savings goal and make it happen.
I also thought that the burial plot was it sort of for me symbolized, in all of these relationships that are fraught with abuse and violence and just not great experiences, it's still important to remember your family and to honor your parents, even if it is in something that their living bodies don't experience. But just, I think also for Shoko, I think she really felt a sense of guilt for some of the shit she put her parents through emotionally, in particular when she was younger. And so I also think it was sort of her way to atone for some of her behavior, to be like, you know what? I was a shit. I know I was. I gave y'all a hard time. I put this burden on you. So here's what I can do for you. Even if it is after they've both died, it's still this way for her to show her respect for her parents.
Yeah, it made me feel a little guilty too. I never approached the level of delinquency that she did, but I have put my parents through some emotional obstacles as well in high school and early college years, and probably now because they think COVID's a hoax. They're not going to listen to this, so I don't.
It's all good.
It's fine.
Yeah. Overall, I think that Yakuza Moon is. Peter and I were talking about this earlier. It's not a good book in the way that you're like, oh, this was enjoyable. It is not an enjoyable.
It's a difficult book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important book because I think that it really shows the power of individual narrative and individual story and experience.
Right. And I think as I know what Julie and I fall into of these American kids who grew up thinking Japan's the coolest, reading a down-to-earth, just kind of bummer, real-life memoir of somebody who lived through all this stuff in Japan and can at least talk about the more kind of the dark side of just how things are. It's not all just fun and cartoons. I think is really important for just somebody who still finds that, country and its culture to be fairly interesting, as well as the source of just a lot of my pop culture. So it's nice to read something that's just about a normal Japanese person who doesn't fall into any of the other trappings of, my entertainment from there.
I mean, honestly, meandering path memoirs just really resonate with me because I feel like I'm on a pretty meandering path to find my life's purpose. So it feels good to read about someone who went through a bunch of different experiences to ultimately self-actualize and become fulfilled in not just her relationships, but in her unique set of skills and personality traits. I mean, I thought the same thing when I read Haruki Murakami's What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and how he went through all of these lives before he became an international best-selling author at, I think, in his mid-30s. But I think that is a little more powerful for me personally than something that is easily tied up in a bow linear narrative. So I really enjoyed it.
Our game for this pairing is Yakuza 0. This is a wild game. Wild. So I know Peter has a deep love of the Yakuza games.
Deep.
So
like
I want to hear from you in a minute. But Julia, as a first-time Yakuza player, what are your sort of initial impressions of this game?
Well, I think my initial impressions are just how off the wall things can get when you're outside the law, you're living in an urban setting, and you're on somebody's bad side. And you don't even really know who that somebody is half the time. And a lot of things can go wrong, but also hilarity can ensue. That is my impression of this gaming series. I just had a blast. I just loved playing this game. But I think for me, my favorite part, and of course, I am the devoted Chow parent of the Sonic games too. My favorite part was the side quest.
I know.
They
Okay.
were just so goofy.
My favorite thing was I'm gonna call you out, Julia, because after we recorded the intro, I got a text from you that was like, how many chapters are there in this game? And I was like, 17. And you were basically like, oh shit, I'm on chapter 5 because I've just been doing side quests all the time. And I was like, if we were not playing this for like a deadline, I would have done a lot more side quests because they are insane. Like,
well, they stopped letting you do them at a certain chapter too. It's I think it was chapter either 16 or 17 where I was running around as Kiryu in Osaka and was like, where are the randos? I know someone needs something from me. I know I can earn a diamond plate, but nobody will talk to you because you're not supposed to be there because you're Kiryu and you're like on a mission.
Yep.
And so yeah, they cut me off is what I'm saying.
Yes. Well, and getting to that is that I think the Yakuza series is a game that is about 7 different games in one, and while it's not the best in any of those categories, it is decent at all of them. It is a game that, you know, it's like, yeah, sometimes we're just going to be a mini game simulator. Sometimes we're going to be a dating simulator. Sometimes we're going to be a story cutscene heavy melodrama soap opera. And sometimes it's just going to be fetch quest, fetch quest, fetch quest, fetch quest. And sometimes we're a pretty decent brawler. It's just all of those things packed into one. And it's so many different things that if you took away 5 of them, there'd still be a lot, but it's you want as many random little things in there as you can get.
I also struggled hard with that because there were so many things you could do. You could fish. By the way, did you fish?
Yes.
I fished.
I tried.
Like, what the fuck? And it had nothing to do with anything. They were
Right.
just like, here's a fishing pole.
There's 2 different rhythm games, a bowling simulator, pool and darts,
the claw game.
the claw game, as well
Oh,
as...
I won the claw game.
Yes, the claw game, as well as 2 Sega arcade games, Space Harrier, and I think there's one other one that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. And so it was like, it was cool, but it was
Batting
also...
cages.
It was cool, but it was also super overwhelming as a player who is not great at brawlers. So, like, the brawler part of it was already a little bit of a struggle street for me. I played on easy. I have no shame. It was still...
So it kept asking me if I wanted to play on easy. It asked me that after 3 boss fights. 2 of them were Kuze fights. I hate that guy. I literally am so pissed, spoiler, that they did not kill him because I wanted to kill him the entire game.
Well, he eventually...
He went to jail.
Oh, he went to... That's right. Because Awano and oh, fuck. The other one.
Shibusawa.
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 Because they both died. By the way, I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but when what is it? Is it Awano who gets fucking stabbed?
No.
No, is that
Awano takes a bullet.
as someone who is not amazing at a brawler type video game to begin with, it was very stressful to have all of these other things to manage. So I did a couple of the side quests. I mainlined the story. Like, I did a few side quests just to do them. And then I moved on. I was like, I can't focus on that. And I fished once, and I did not try the managing Club Sunshine for Majima.
Oh, I did. I gathered so many bitches for that man. And you have to buy them gifts.
Yes.
Each one of them asks you, like, he's super sketchy about it, too. Majima is, I mean, who is your favorite character and why is it Majima? But Majima talks to women differently than he talks to any men. And he uses this high-pitched, like, polite Disney voice when he talks to women. So he's sketchy as hell. He's going up to these women and he's like, say, I think that you'd be perfect for this here club I'm running. And they all have the same response, which is, I don't know. That sounds kind of lame. But if you buy me a present, I'll consider it. And then they tell you what kind of present they want, and you have to go get it for them. It's super sketchy. And it made me like Majima just a little bit less, but I still did it. Still made the club profitable.
Would you work in a hostess club if somebody offered to buy you a $1,500 watch for it?
No.
Yo, I would be amazing in that job. I just want to say,
you totally would.
I was telling my boyfriend, first of all, can I go to a hostess club as a woman in Japan and just like have a bunch of beautiful ladies around me? Can I do that? Is that available to me? Probably not. However, 2, can I go live in Japan and be a hostess at a hostess club? Because I would rock that job. Probably not, because I don't speak Japanese and because I'm getting up there in age. But those were 2 thoughts that crossed my mind in regards to the hostess club.
Yeah, I did not. I struggled the first time I played the hostess club minigame. I didn't know that you could zoom in. I didn't know the girls needed help. I didn't know that when they said check please, you had to do something.
You had to give them the check, please.
It was stressful. I will say I did do a good amount of the real estate for Kiryu. That is much easier. And I liked that as a way to make fast money.
Oh, I have a question then.
Yeah.
If you didn't do any of the side quests, did you have any choices in terms of managers?
I had a couple. So I did the terrible, infamous panty selling club.
Oh, I did that one.
Quest.
She's a great manager.
And so I got her.
Lots of experience.
I actually also did the Yankee pop star who's really a good boy. And so he was a manager for me too. And
he's overpriced though.
He is very expensive. But the one thing I do want to say about the number of things you can do in this game is that it is hard to tell what you need to do and what is just fun extra stuff. Because there were times that it felt like I needed to do these things to progress, to make money, to do this, to do that. And it turned out like I don't that is not really helpful in this thing. Like it was hard for me to discern like what do I need to spend my time on and what can I just let lie and not deal with.
Right. And were you playing it under normal circumstances where you'd be willing to spend maybe a total of 40 hours over a longer period of time rather than I think you cleared it in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would have just gone about, because when I played it myself, just, a few years ago, I was just kind of doing whatever. And I remember there were long gaps before I actually got to storyline. It's like I did the first couple of bits and then I did nothing for a long time. Like, it took me forever to just get to Majima the first time around because I was just doing all the side stuff with Kiryu because it was fun to run around and play games and do side quests and all that jazz. And they really build in some of the introduction. So it's like you have to do karaoke during the intro. You have to learn at least one fun thing to do. You have to learn how to do the property. You have to learn how to do the Club Sunshine. They build those into the main story missions. And I think they're really trying to inspire you to go in depth with some of those because both of those minigames, you take over the whole city if you go through that whole process. You fight like 5 big clubs or bosses as you go through that whole situation. They're their own at least 5-hour stories just on their own of doing all those collections and building it up. And they also give you a lot of money that you need to be able to upgrade your fighting skills if you're trying to get yourself up to like max tier combatant, because you're not going to make enough money with Kiryu unless you're doing property, and you're not going to make enough money with Majima unless you're doing Club Sunshine.
I would agree, and there was actually a point where we were supposed to be in West Park for some reason, which is where the homeless encampment is, and each homeless tent has a mini game that you can then learn and play. And I thought you had to play each homeless person mini game in order to advance. And I played like you do not, no. And I played like 3 of them, and they were all very frustrating. And then we were like, wait, there's a guy to talk to. So yeah, I agree. You don't always know what you're supposed to be doing, and that's part of the fun, but also part of the consternation.
Yeah.
I mean, after playing this game, I don't know if I like good video games.
What do you mean by that? I unpack that statement, please.
Because you said that it does like 5 different things, and it doesn't do any of them spectacularly, but it does all of them passably well.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I'm interested in playing a good game.
Right, but no, I'm saying that's what makes Yakuza a good game, is that you have so many different things you can do. Like, the number of verbs Kiryu and Majima can do is immense, because it's like they can fight, they can bowl, they can talk, they can, charm, they can do so many different things while inhabiting that one character, and by doing all those different things, you can feel like a more well-rounded character than if you just go strictly through the story of even a very good technical game, that gets a bit more praise than the Yakuza series.
I do think that the environment is fantastic in Yakuza 0. Visually, the visuals are incredible. And we looked at some videos of the actual neighborhoods that
Kabukicho and Dotonbori.
Right, that Sotenbori and Kamurocho are based off of. And I think that the game does such a good job of making you feel like you are in those places. And I do think if under different circumstances, I probably would have spent a lot more time or not passive, but like non-main story time. But it definitely lets you immerse yourself in the setting. The restaurants that you can just go chill at a sushi place and eat your food, or go by a takoyaki stand and grab your takoyaki. Like, the way that they just created an environment for you to run around and fight and eat and play is amazing. I was very, very impressed at the visual surroundings of this game.
Well, and they made it very achievement oriented too. Like, each time that you eat a different food item, they put a check mark next to it, and it had me thinking, okay, well, now I need to eat every food item. I need to go only to restaurants I haven't been to before, which is honestly the same thing that I would do in a city in general, but it made it a lot more fun for me to discover different things in the world.
Yeah, it's great video game tourism, and they do reward you in-game for exploring those nooks and crannies. You get CP points, which you can use at the temples to unlock, further things of being able to, like, run faster, eat as much food as you want, and yada, yada, yada. But they give you that for, like, just doing so many mundane things a lot. So they're like, hey, you walked around 50 kilometers. Here's a CP point. Oh, you ate everything at the takoyaki place. Here's a CP point. And so it's just nice that they, like, really reward you for exploring the depth of all this very niche and kind of inconsequential but fun content that they stuck into this game, where they're like, yeah, go bat 10 times. You get a CP point for that. Good job. I hope you had fun batting.
I did not have fun batting.
No,
but
that minigame is so hard.
I was better at it than my boyfriend, which happens in most sports.
I will be honest, did not step foot in the batting range, except when I did the Baby Dojima side quest. I did do the Baby Dojima side quest, which I kind of loved.
He has such a good outfit.
He's the dapperest little boy. But I did not even attempt the batting minigame. I stuck with karaoke the one time I had to do it. And
you were all over that porn theater.
I did not.
You
did
didn't?
not go
Why
there.
not?
I did not go there. I also didn't buy the porn magazine for the little boy.
You should have. He wanted it so bad. He just didn't know what it was.
It made me feel icky, so I didn't do it.
I watched several videos.
It's very light stuff of just girls in bikinis.
I think that I was put off because the man who tells you about it is the human erection, and I hate it. I hate that. Like that just.
He's got such a fun little dance.
It's antithetical to my life because I think he's horrible. So I just did not engage in anything that the human erection told me to do.
Well, too bad. That's our Halloween costume this year.
Hot dog, literally.
But getting a little off the side content, because we could just dig into that for freaking ever. The actual story, which is convoluted,
Insane.
but I want to know from not having experienced this before, what were y'all's take on this very, I'm going to say, intricate soap opera of a mafia plot?
Intricate is the right word. Convoluted is also the right word. Soap opera is also the right term. And maybe it's because I really did mainline the story, and so I consumed it very quickly. It is wild. It is a wild story, but it makes sense from a soap if you think about it as a soap opera. I felt like the dual storylines raised, like you have Kiryu has been framed for the death of this man at the empty lot, and the empty lot is the critical thing. And he, leaves the Yakuza. He's going to clear his name. He's going to avenge his Yakuza father, Kazuma, who is in jail, saved him from the orphanage with his bro, Nishiki. And
I heard Nishiki.
And this is I'm like, okay, Kiryu, empty lot's wild. Then you switch over to Majima, who has one eye because he was tortured, but is alive. He's running this fucking club. He's 25 years old. Also 24. The age is insane.
Yeah, Kiryu is 20 years old.
That is not true. I don't believe you.
Canonically, he is that old in this game.
But so then you go to Majima, right? And then all you know from there is he's trying to get back into the Yakuza. He's told to go kill Makoto, who you think is a man, but surprise, it's a woman. She's blind. And as the two storylines continue, it became clear that they were going to intersect. And I am not going to lie, I was the twists are good. Story-wise, I was oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that twist. And that, the Makoto is
secret siblings with Tachibana, and he's
owner of the empty lot.
Right, and he's half Chinese, half Japanese because his family got left behind in Manchuria after the war.
And his second right-hand man kidnapped and abused Makoto.
Sold her into sex slavery.
I do want to talk about him because I feel like there are some powerful moments around that character.
Oda or Tachibana?
Well, both, but Oda specifically is the one I want to talk about at some point.
Let's do it. Let's talk about Oda.
So we know it's convoluted, but why? Tell me about Oda and your thoughts on him.
So the thing about Oda is there's a big bait and switch that happens with his character because initially he is this kind of supportive mentor figure. Everyone that Kiryu knows is out to kill him right now, except Oda. And Oda is trying to make sure, okay, you can get a real job, you can be legit, and here's how you do business. But then you come to find out that he is a mole in about 3 different directions. Not only that, has he committed this horrible crime against a woman that he didn't even know, but that ends up being the sister of his boss, his role model.
Yeah, his sworn brother of Tachibana.
Right. And so you have this big conflict with his character, and then when things come down to the wire and when Oda is up against the wall, there's an opportunity for either Kiryu or Makoto, who he, again, sold into sex slavery, to kill him, to dispose of him, to take revenge on him, and they choose not to. And as things are progressing and as they separate from each other, Oda observes that he has been given compassion and forgiveness, and he makes it about him.
Yep.
He immediately does the straight male thing of, you should want to kill me, and here's why. He literally mansplains to Makoto, who, again, he sold into sex slavery, why she should want to kill him. And then he doesn't stop there. He tells Kiryu, tell Tachibana XYZ, that I died for him, that I loved him, that he was my number one.
I would never betray him, even though he was literally betraying him.
In 2 different directions in this moment. And so that moment for me was such a 180 of how I felt about a character. It literally felt like a betrayal to me as a player of this game. And I was just like, I am fine with him dying. He can die. And then Kiryu ends up not letting him have that. He goes to Tachibana, and the first thing out of his mouth is, by the way, Oda sold your sister into sex slavery. And I mean, that's not the direct quote.
but
they kind of just pan wipe and be like, sometime later Kiryu has explained everything.
Right, but the first thing that he says is not what Oda told him to say.
Right, Kiryu's not going to lie to Tachibana.
And that,
well, no, but he could have, he could have put it in a different order. He could have softened the blow. He could have done any number of things, but Kiryu is like ever the most sincere, straightforward, honest dude, and is like, no, I'm going to give it to you straight. Like, you're clearly hurting, and I'm going to tell you something that's going to hurt you even more.
Because Kiryu's the best.
And I love that about him.
Yeah.
I think that, he is a dragon among men for that reason.
I do. I think the whole Oda twist and betrayal, it really does make it feel like, okay, Oda, you should sacrifice your life because you fucked everyone over. You're terrible. Like, your sworn brother, you betrayed him because you couldn't bear the thought that he would know what you did. And like, and Kiryu is such a straight shooter in a lot of ways, to a fault, to the point where you're like, dude, like, read the room, man.
Make it a little easier on yourself.
That's a pretty consistent thing he does for the next 6 games.
I feel like both Kiryu and Majima don't read the room. And they just, like, once they've decided on a path, they decided on that path, and they're not doing themselves any favors by acquiescing to what the people around them are trying to get them to do.
Right, but the big difference between them is that Majima will lie.
That
He's not
is
necessarily
true.
great at it yet, but he does lie to try and, like, make his stuff happen. He lies about killing Makoto. He lies to whether or not he's seen her yet, to Sagawa, the guy who's, locking up his gilded cage in Sotenbori.
He was another guy that I just wanted to off immediately.
And he
I hate him so much.
He's the worst.
The worst. And he looks like one of my old bosses too. So
Yeah.
I was saying, oh my god, Japanese. I won't say his name.
No,
but the whole game, I was like, this guy.
No, Sagawa actually has one of the most realistic models and faces of all these characters, to the point where you're like, oh, you're such a realistic scumbag. I hate you.
I sent his picture to one of my old coworkers and was like, look, who does this look like? And he was like, I mean, kinda. But I kept calling him that.
Yeah, he's just like smug and dickish enough, but not being especially talented throughout, that you're like, man, you are a realistic asshole right here.
You know, it's so funny because this game, obviously it's Yakuza, right? Like the Yakuza are the focus and they are criminals and they do terrible things.
Quite explicitly, yes.
But no one is likable. Even the main, I'm not gonna lie, even the main characters, Kiryu and Majima, I ended up enjoying. However, I hated Majima at the beginning. I was like, this guy is obnoxious. He's like a showman. He's
you don't like men who
annoying.
posture.
He just is like, I did not like him at all. And then he grew on me once he like decided not to kill Makoto and actually work with Lee and like save her life, whatever.
Once he chose not to be a hitman against the blind girl, he really grew on me.
Exactly. But like, I knew he was a main character and I was hoping to like him from the start because I liked Kiryu for the most part. Like he's a cute dude. He's just like trying to do something. He's very earnest. But Majima just felt very slimy at the beginning to me.
Well, you know what that means? I think that really suggests that the person who would play Majima in a movie adaptation is and has to be Adam Driver.
Oh,
very
yes.
polarizing figure. Some people love him. Some people think he's like, ooh, look at him.
Well,
what a slime ball. I'm in the camp of, ooh, look at him. Kylo Ren.
Well, and then I think Scarlett Johansson should play Kiryu.
Kiryu, I've already figured this out. And she would play Makoto. No, Kiryu is young Keanu Reeves, like Point Break Keanu Reeves. And I say that for a very specific reason.
Keanu Reeves was not thick enough back then to be Kiryu.
That's true. He wasn't thick enough to be an FBI agent in Point Break either, but that's besides the point. The thing that made me think that young Keanu Reeves is Kiryu was when he was escorting Makoto to Kamurocho, and he, like, very hover hands, lots of hover hands, like, did not touch her, was not gonna let himself be implicated in any more pain that she was having or experiencing. And I was just like, immediately, what a gentleman, Keanu Reeves.
Well, and this will come up in the later games, since I know you've mentioned you want to play Kiwami 1, but Kiryu is a very sensitive man to those he considers to be vulnerable. He is open to being somewhat vulnerable and a big burly protector to those people, and there is a lot of tenderness to his character. You don't see, I would say you don't see enough of it in Zero, considering it's supposed to be a prequel kind of setting up his character. However, it is very apparent in Kiwami 1 and then kind of forward. He is trying to be a good guy, but for some reason he decided that the best way to be a good guy is to literally become a criminal. Kind of the opposite of Batman in that respect.
Well, they are, there are bad criminals who do very, very bad things. And then it's a checks and balances system, really. It's criminals with a heart of gold making sure those vulnerable people don't get swept up in the business of bad criminals. But I think we saw a really wonderful moment with Kiryu, which made him grow on me and made me think that he is more perceptive than I initially assumed, which was when he was in the Love Hotel with Makoto. And she was talking about what had happened to her. and he was listening on the couch, probably 5 feet away from her. I think that in some American media, you might see the big burly guy go and put an arm around her, or like go and otherwise pursue physical contact, assuming that's what she needed. But he knew that what she needed was for him to not touch her at all. Just so much physical trauma, so much pain just emanating from the words she was using, that he just sat and acknowledged what she was saying and listened to her. That was immensely powerful for me. And that just, like, kudos to the writers for knowing that that's what that character needed. And that's what would be realistic in the moment for someone who's sensitive and perceptive to vulnerable people and their feelings.
And I think that is totally juxtaposed with Majima, because I feel like Majima doesn't know. He desperately wants to help Makoto, but he doesn't know what to do. And I think the scene that really sticks out for me is when they are in Kamurocho and they go get takoyaki. And Makoto, it's very clear, like, Makoto wants Majima to leave her alone and let her be independent for the first time in so long. Like, yes, her vision's not totally back, but, like, she has some semblance of vision. She can see outlines. She can, like, she's not great yet, but you can tell she really wants that independence, and he just can't. He can't do it. He can't just, like, let her be an adult and do what she wants to do on her own. And so she has to trick him into going and leaving her alone so she can get out. And
he eventually does.
Yeah,
too.
at the end.
Exactly. And I loved that end scene because I for sure thought he was going to be like, it's me, Maji. Like, or something, maybe not that on the nose, but like that they were going to recognize each other. He obviously knew what she looked like. She was going to realize, oh, this is the man that, like, I went through so much with. But he, at that point, realized, like, he knows. He's like, I have to just let her. She's living a life. She has a man who loves her.
Who has a real job.
Who has a real job, who can support and love and care for her. And he has that realization. And I just thought that was such a nice way to have that be the final interaction in this game with Majima and Makoto, because he had not been able to really treat her like an adult for the whole earlier part of the game.
Right, and this is where it comes partially into prequel territory, because if you were playing this game as a prequel as it was originally intended, and you are familiar with Majima from the future, the numbered games, you know that he is known as, like, Mad Dog Majima. He is the kind of Joker-fied enforcer of the Shimano family, and he is, does a lot of kind of out there stuff, and he's kind of all over the place. And he knew that wasn't a world in which he could be bringing in this sweet woman who had already been through so much that was totally against her will. She didn't want any of this. She was never doing any power grabs. She just wanted to, one, move to Japan, and then two, try and find her brother and find her place in Japanese society despite being effectively born and raised Chinese. And so it's just one of those things where he knows he's no good for her, in the respect that, what he wants to do with his life and the lot in life he has already chosen is one that is not supportive for somebody who wants to be a good, honest person. And so he can't drag her down after he did so much to save her from that life, that he would have just been causing her more pain down the road by, being the significant other of a high Yakuza like him.
And a club owner. I mean, let's be real. He pulls.
He can lay pipe all day.
Yeah, he really can.
Gross.
Aaron's making a face.
Gross.
You mean that the nickname Mad Dog Majima is too posturing and obnoxious for you?
His dick is a cyclops too.
Does that mean he only has one testicle?
Yeah, but he wears an eye patch over it. So we've got these two protagonists, and this is the only game where that's fully split, to my knowledge, of the Yakuza series. Who do you prefer as a protagonist, and why? I want to know. I know, Julia, I think I have a leaning on where you're going, but why don't we start with you?
I mean, Majima has a bat.
True. Very true.
So did you like him primarily for fighting style, though?
Well, I mean, he has the bat, and then he has the breaking fighting style, which was just delightful. And, I mean, you know, I come from an urban setting. I am a city gal. Aaron is making
I'm
such
laughing.
a face.
The mean streets of Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
That's exactly.
the streets of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And no, I love breakdancing. I think it's the coolest thing ever. You know, in terms of a protagonist, I think that Majima on his own is more compelling because he has the capacity to lie, because he has inner workings and inner thoughts and other interests beyond his ultimate mission, which is to get back into the family. But I really enjoyed playing as Kiryu for the strength of his relationship with Nishiki. And I don't know if you guys did the side quest where you write postcards to a radio host.
Yep.
But yeah, I definitely wanted to pick I Heart Nishiki for my pen name. And every time Nishiki did anything, I was like, I Heart Nishiki. That was my catchphrase.
I can't wait for you to play Kiwami 1.
It was, I mean, and that climactic scene at the end where Kiryu is faced with a choice and he almost makes the wrong one, and Nishiki appears out of nowhere after presumably killing at least one person, and just prevents him from making that choice. I just think their relationship is really fulfilling to watch as a player, especially because they begin and end together.
The Kiryu Nishiki relationship definitely was one of those like side threads that I found really interesting, and that it wasn't a huge part of the overall story, but it was a huge part of Kiryu's story. And I really liked that aspect of playing as Kiryu. I think Majima is a more interesting protagonist on a narrative level, and I think you're right that part of it is because he lies, and he's a lot more thoughtful and conniving with the way that he is approaching his situation, and you can just tell that he's very calculating in how he's going to try and get out of things and make decisions. However, I preferred Kiryu in actual fighting and in the setting. I liked Kamurocho more as a playground to run around in, and I preferred Kiryu's fighting styles. I really enjoyed going from brawler to beast. I thought that was a lot of fun and very, very easy for me to get a hang of the combos and the grabs and the power moves or heat moves or whatever. So on a technical, mechanical level, I preferred Kiryu, but on a narrative storytelling level, I think I preferred Majima.
I think I would agree with that. I do love bitch slapping a guy with a traffic cone. That was a highlight. And also the Y combo where you take a bicycle wheel and smash it over a guy such that he is now stuck in a bicycle wheel.
It's a good one. My preference is for Kiryu, and I think I liked his fighting styles a bit more overall. I wasn't really a fan of the thug style, but I love the brawler style and being able to switch into beast mode for getting those huge combos, those big swings. My favorite beast style move is where you pick up a guy and then, you do the triangle combo and he swings around and you hit and knock him into a bunch of other guys.
Yes.
That one is my favorite heat combo, and it's one that I rely on anytime I was fighting large groups of dudes just to really kind of, thin the herd a little bit there. And really, I preferred the Kamurocho setting a bit more to the Sotenbori. It's the map that they've worked in previously, so I think that's why I wound up with more details. It's the consistent setting of the Yakuza series. And while I did enjoy the facet of there being a river in Sotenbori based on, the actual river that flows through that part of Osaka, but I think it's just there's more stuff to do in Kamurocho, and it just feels a bit more like a really fun, dense city, whereas Sotenbori has like a couple of cool things, but it's more like the secondary map. It really feels like the secondary map, and so I just wound up enjoying the Kiryu side a bit more, just because there was more to do because it was just the bigger area. And then on a character level, I relate more to Kiryu, the more earnest, upfront type. The kind who's very loyal to a fault and was just like, why would I say that? That's not true. I'm going to do the honorable thing here, and I'm going to leave the Yakuza, and I will fight so many of you to let me leave.
Even though everyone's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this?
He has a code, and he sticks to it. He will never betray Kazuma-san.
That is a character who had so much to do with the story, and yet the only time we really interact with him is at the very end, after it's all been concluded. Kazuma is like, he's in jail the whole time, and yet he is pulling he set all these things into motion. He got in touch with Tachibana to get in touch with Kiryu, with the empty lot, and with Sarah, and like, he's the biggest non-figure figure in this game.
Right, and he's very prominent in Yakuza 1. And really the thing with how they end up structuring a lot of these characters is that a lot of the people who are very important to just this game and don't appear in any of the future ones have to die by the end, because that's how you explain that Kiryu never kept touch with them. So that's why, like Tachibana dies and Oda dies and several other people die because they're not in the future game. So it's like, well, we got to get rid of them somehow. So
if Oda hadn't died, I would have come through the screen and killed him myself.
Well, they did it for you because he's in the prequel, so he has to either be dead or have a reason to not be in the next one. And so they had to build that in there.
I kind of wondered when we were looking at all of the lieutenants, the 4 lieutenants for the Dojima family, whether they had come up kind of at the same time and been sworn brothers the whole time, like Kiryu and Nishiki, or whether they had all individually been very ambitious, come up independently of each other, and now they're kind of de facto sworn brothers. They, tolerate each other. They try to stay one step ahead of whoever else's ambition. I'm not really looking for an answer, but it's an interesting question for me of like, how do you become leadership sworn brothers versus sworn brothers because you were orphans together?
And that relationship between the 3 lieutenants of the Dojima family is such an interesting one, because they are all fighting to get the empty lot. They all want to be the one, because that means they are essentially going to be captain and replace Kazuma. But they also work together. They work together, but they're working against each other, and they will let Kuze have his fun. But they're like, fuck it, dude. Like, you can't do it. Like, you can't deliver. So let one of us step forward. And it's almost like there's this hierarchy, even though there's not a formal hierarchy. It's just a very interesting villain relationship between those three.
Well, I think it really, one of the more confusing things from an outside perspective on this is just like, it's hard to tell who's on the same side of who, where most of these people are technically all in the same organized crime organization of the Tojo clan. There are a few people from the Omi Alliance, like Sagawa, and you can just kind of ignore them, but technically all these people report to the same boss. They all should have similar goals, but they're also just so conniving. It's it's like the no honor among thieves thing, where it's like, yeah, we're all on the same team, but if I get the point before you get the point, I win. Haha, fuck you. And so they just screw each other over and get into these fights and end up murdering each other all the time, it seems, when it's like, y'all are on the same team, just play together, it's fine. But that's not what they're all about. They all want the power of being the one to, control it all. They're all very conniving and ladder climbing and X, Y, and Z, and that's what makes it a very dramatic and confusing story, because there's all these different pieces of the puzzle.
They all want to scapegoat Kuze. That is the aim.
Yes.
No, I was talking to my boyfriend about this because their relationship between their leadership structure reminded me kind of the four generals concept from anime. And it turns out, we looked this up, it turns out that this is in anime because it's a Buddhist concept. And there are four gods called the Shitano. And this has been translated loosely in many different ways. We were watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0, and they literally just used the word Shitano and didn't translate it in the subtitles. So the ways that it's been translated are four heavenly kings, four archfiends, fearsome four lords, and then, of course, in Dragon Ball Z, Spice Boys.
Nice.
But in Sailor Moon, for instance, the first series, you have these four generals that are under this queen, and you have to get through all of them to defeat the queen. So that's what I was thinking of the whole time was, okay, well, we need to pick each one of these off, but that's kind of not how it ends up going down. It ends up being that they each have kind of their own motives, and then Awano ends up sacrificing himself and being the honorable one. But yeah, this is a trope that I guess in Japanese culture they kind of take for granted that everyone just knows this reference. So it was really fascinating to observe that in this game, which takes place in contemporary Japan and is not like a fantasy play, to see this play out among these four different lieutenants of the Dojima family.
I do wonder, like, how much more would I enjoy this game if I understood all the different references that I'm sure are woven into this story and the game, and the side quests and the settings. And I know that there's a level that I cannot get to just because of those cultural touchstones, and we have that in American media, right? Things that like we get, but that maybe a Japanese consumer doesn't get. And so I think it's always so interesting to read things and play things and experience things that are set in real worlds that are not your own culture, because there's just a level you can't reach. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, but it's, you get so much more out of it if you get those references. And I just wonder,
did you catch the crucifixion image when Awano takes all those bullets and then randomly his hand is bloody, and it's like, oh,
yep,
I got you. You're Jesus.
And he's not the only one. I mean, who is the crazy one? Nishitani.
Ah, yes.
That's the same, where he's like, he gets shot like 12 times and is still walking, and
just lurching towards that one cop who could just run away.
Yeah. But yeah, there's this imagery that we interpret And I'm sure there are all sorts of those nuggets, like the four generals, different things that are in there that are meaningful if you know what to look for.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I think makes this such a standout of Japanese something or other is the fact that it is set in a realistic Japanese city, and it's made by a Japanese company primarily for a Japanese audience. Yes, they port it to other countries, but up until this game, there was no English localization track, and the first couple of Yakuza games, they did have English localization with full voice acting, and then they just weren't selling that well here, so they're like, okay, well, we'll save some money, get rid of the English voice acting. Now, suddenly in 2016, these games become popular again with no localization outside of just, subtitles. And now they're getting back into, so the past two Yakuza spin-off games have had full English voice cast along with it. So it's interesting to see if there will be a change in future Yakuza games now that there is a larger American audience that they may be planning around. Whereas I'm sure Yakuza 0, they were like, yeah, maybe we'll sell a couple 100,000 copies in the U.S., maybe, but it's mostly for Japan and mostly for East Asia as well. That's all we have for you this week. Look forward to next week where we'll be pairing these two together and talking about how they compare and contrast. I know that's going to end up being an interesting one since the subject matter is so wildly different in these two pieces. But you can find all of our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, now starting to put stuff on YouTube, so you can find all of our stuff there, as well as gameandread.wordpress.com.
We are on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Game and Read. And I am on Twitter at BookishTextPat. I also have a Bookstagram at A Tale of Two Shelves.
With your mama.
With my mom.
I am also on Twitter. I am at Nerd in the World. Julia, where can people find you who want to see your thoughts and things?
I am on Twitter at KOCOOKED. My mom has 2 Twitter accounts because she forgot her password. Erin talked about her mom, so that's why I'm talking about my mom.
Find Abigail Cook.
Yes. I'm also on LinkedIn and Snapchat, so I only have the worst social media.
Our intro music was written and performed by Avery Murchison, and there is a link to his Bandcamp in the description.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.
Game and Read.